Please be seated. My name is Judy Davidson, and I serve as chairwoman of the Scott County Republicans, and I would like to thank you to our headquarters today. We're a little cramped, but that is so great. It is so wonderful to see all of you here with us today. As you can see on that board, we're only 90 days away from the election, 50 days until early voting. So after today, I hope to see all of you here back tonight or tomorrow or next week to make some calls and do some door knocking. As you know, every vote counts. Senator Mark Shulgren from Iowa won in 2012 only by 10 votes. So if you look at the 10 people sitting around you, those could be people that could make or break whether or not we elect a woman U.S. Senator to the United States Senate or a woman U.S. Congresswoman. So we need all of your help, and I would thank you for coming today. So without further ado, I am very honored and privileged to welcome with us today Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. He stands for constitutional liberties, fiscal responsibility, and limiting governmental overreach. So please join me in welcoming Senator Rand Paul to the East Coast of Iowa.
Thank you. What a great crowd. I hope we haven't broken any government rules. Now, I don't know a lot about campaigning or a lot about Iowa, but I was thinking, you know what? If you're running for the U.S. Senate in Iowa, I'm thinking it's probably not a great idea to trash Chuck Grassley or farmers. What do you think? Can you imagine anybody from Iowa voting for somebody who's going to criticize your senior senator and say farmers may not be smart enough to be in the Judiciary Committee? I frankly, as a physician, think maybe we got too many lawyers on the Judiciary Committee. Our country is at a crossroads. We face enormous problems, enormous challenges. There's a lot good about our country. There's a lot of greatness left in our country. But I am truly worried about our country. If I weren't worried, I'd still just be a physician in Bowling Green practicing medicine. I did it for 20 years and I missed practicing medicine. But I got more and more alarmed and worried about the direction of the country. We're borrowing $1 million every minute. If you look at the debtclock.org, it's just spiraling out of control. $17.5 trillion in debt. Our debt is equal to our economy now. Debt's equal to GDP. That's pretty serious. It's really alarming where we've gotten to at this point. You say, well, what does that mean? Well, some economists say we're losing 1 million jobs a year just because of the burden of this debt. And really, the question is, do people have the gumption? Do your representatives have the wherewithal to actually do something about it? Or is it so beyond hope that it's just going to spiral out of control? One reason I don't want it to spiral out of control is I don't want to see the destruction of a currency. Anybody ever remember what happened to Germany in the 1920s? Anybody ever seen the pictures of the wheelbarrows full of money? The money became so worthless that people burned the money for fuel. The money became so worthless that it was worth more as basically as fuel than it was as a currency. I have something that I gave to my dad, and it was a frame of the German money at the time. September 1st, it was like 50 marks for a loaf of bread. September 14th, it was like 1,000 marks. September 30th, it was like 50,000 marks. And then it was 1 million marks. In the space of about 6 weeks, the currency was utterly destroyed. Our currency, once upon a time, had a backing. It was backed by gold and silver. Then it was backed by the full faith and credit of the government, but we were still the mightiest country on earth, and people respected and thought it still had value. Your currency is now backed by used car loans, bad home loans. The stuff no bank would buy, the Federal Reserve bought. The Federal Reserve increased what they call their asset sheet, their credit. They bought stuff, $4 trillion in the last couple of years. And you think, well, assets sound good, right? Assets is just debt. They bought the debt of the country, but they bought the debt no one else wanted. That's what your dollar is backed by. Why do we do this? because we perpetually spend money we don't have, to the tune of almost $1 trillion a year on average. This president, when he started, there was $10 trillion in debt. Some of that, frankly, Republicans are responsible for. Now there's going to be, by the time he finishes, nearly $20 trillion in debt. He's going to double the amount of debt. You say, well, where does this all come from? If you look at the budget and you look at spending, 2/3 of it is Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Now people say, well, I still want that. Well, if you want that, you got to fix it because it's going bankrupt. You can't keep these programs unless we change them. People say, well, whose fault is it? Social Security's $6 trillion in the hole. Medicare's $35 to $40 trillion in the hole. Whose problem is it? Republicans or Democrats? No, it's your grandparents' fault for having too many kids. The baby boomers are all retiring. It's not really anybody's fault, but it's just a fact. And then families got smaller with each successive generation. So you used to have 16 workers for one retiree. Social Security was running a surplus for decade after decade. Medicare did fine because you had a lot of young people and not very many old people. Also, average life expectancy was 65 when we started these programs. Now it's 80 and it's continuing to rise. All that's good news. Let's just figure out how to deal with it. It's pretty simple. Reagan knew it back in '83. He said, we're living longer, so we have to change the age. We changed it from 65 to 67. Didn't affect anybody at the time because we raised it a couple of months every year for 30 years. That's all we have to do again. That fixed 2/3 of the Social Security problem. Fixes about 1/3 of the Medicare problem. But you just have to believe that you have to do something about it. But right now, nobody's doing anything about it. The president says, oh, he'll look at entitlements if we raise taxes. If we raise taxes again, we think it's a disaster for the economy. This last quarter, we actually were in negative growth. This is the president still blaming everything on Bush 6 years later. When's he going to own up that he's got some responsibility for this and that his policies are dragging us down? Well, we have to decide what we're for. We've been losing, and I'm going to remind you, we lost in Iowa. President Obama won last time and the time before. So there's not enough of you. There's a bunch of you here today, but it's not enough. We have to have a bigger party. So the debate going on in our party across the country is, how do we get big enough to win a presidency again? How do we get big enough to win statewide races, like your U.S. Senate race? How do we get big enough again? So the debate among the muckety-mucks in the Republican Party is, what do we do? Do we dilute our message? Do we give them Democrat light? Do we want to be almost like the Democrats, but maybe this much different? I say, hell no. We need to be what we're for. You can say hell in Iowa, can't you? So anyway, heck no. Heck no. We have to be more boldly for what we're for. We've been putting up candidates that say, frankly, oh, we're for revenue neutral tax reform. That means Mr. Smith pays a little more, Mr. Jones pays a little less. We move it around and it all ends up the same. How's that going to help anybody? That's just shifting the burden. Why don't we be like what we used to be for? When Ronald Reagan ran, he ran for reducing taxes dramatically. He cut the top rate dramatically. You know what happened? More tax money came in because the economy grew. 20 million jobs were created. Let's be the party of economic growth again. Is that enough to win? Maybe not. If you go to Berkeley or if you go to the Urban League and you say you're for tax cuts and a balanced budget amendment, you'll get crickets. But there are issues that we can go to new people with. If you go over to the colleges in Iowa and you say, I'm for balanced budgets and lower taxes, they'll say, I've just got student debt. I don't pay any taxes. I'm worried about my student debt and getting a job. I'm also worried about my cell phone, that the government shouldn't be looking and reading and knowing anything about my cell phone.
Yes.
So we don't have to dilute our message. I think we should be boldly for what we're for, maybe more boldly than we've been in a generation. But then we have to reach out to people who haven't been hearing it and who might hear something different about our message. We need to reach out to young people and say, your phone is your business. Government wants to look at it, they call a judge and get a warrant. We need to say to people who live in poverty, to people who live in long-term unemployment, to the 20% of Detroit that is unemployed, we need to say, we've got a plan. Republicans have a plan to help you. We care about helping you. And frankly, what have the Democrats done for you lately? You know, they've presided over this and you've got this unemployment. What have they done for you lately? I have a plan I call economic freedom zones. Dramatically lower the taxes in Detroit for 10 years. $1.3 billion stimulus, not from you, not from people who live in Atlanta, not from people who live in Kentucky, just people, money that's earned in Detroit. You don't send it to Washington. You just leave it in Detroit over 10 years. It would stimulate and grow jobs. Why would it work when President Obama's government stimulus didn't work? Because there's a difference. A government stimulus means we tax you, you send it to Washington, I bring some of it back, but I've got to choose who to give it to. So if I give it to Mr. Smith and I say, oh, you'd be good in business. Well, 9 times out of 10, I'd pick the wrong person because most people fail in business. When you vote every day where you shop, you select who's going to be good in business. That's why capitalism works. It selects out who can distribute goods the best at the cheapest price to the most people voluntarily. So what you want to do is give the money to people who are already in business, who are succeeding. How do you do that? Cut their taxes. So there's a big difference between stimulating the economy by cutting taxes and stimulating the economy by picking the winners and losers. Now, the president says he's for the middle class, though. He's for the working guy. Well, the question we should ask him is, why did you give $500 million to the guy who owns Solyndra, who's one of the richest men in our country? Why would we give any loans to a rich guy? Why would anybody who has plenty of money get a government loan? We need to tell them that, you know what, the Democrats aren't the party of the little guy. They're the party that's using crony capitalism to reward the rich guy. I think if the message were shown that we are the party that if you live on Social Security, if you live on $700 a month, we're going to be the party that doesn't steal your money. We're not going to steal your purchasing power. We're not going to say every time you go to the gas station, your gas prices go up or your food prices go up. That all happens because we run a deficit. Big government's not the friend of the working class. Big government's not the friend of the elderly or those who live on fixed income. When we have that message, when we can get that message to resound, we're going to win again. So the thing is as we look to go forward, we got to meet people where they are. If they're poor, you don't go talking about the balanced budget. You talk about how we're going to get them out of poverty. If they're young, you talk about how we're going to respect their privacy. If there's someone who has been adversely affected by criminal justice, you tell them, you know what? We're going to protect you from a government that's gone crazy on some of this stuff. Does anybody here, I don't want to see hands because I might be wrong, but does anybody here really think that someone who used marijuana when they were 20 years old should be in jail for 15 years? No. If you ask, and I'll give you an example. I don't think drugs are good for you. I think they're bad for you, and I think it's a mistake for you to use drugs. But 15 years ago, they asked Jerry Falwell, Cal Thomas, and Pat Robertson, they said, if someone in your church were caught using marijuana, what would you rather, incarceration or counseling? They all said counseling. Most of us want these kids to get better and frankly get a little older and smarter so they quit doing these things. But the thing is, put them in jail for 15 years isn't the answer. It's sometimes worse. A guy named Weldon Angelos got 55 years in prison for selling marijuana. Now you might be saying, well, that's terrible, he was selling it. 55 years in prison? You can kill somebody in Kentucky and get out in 12. So we've gone too far. And why do I bring this up? Because 3 out of 4 people in prison are black or brown. You say, well, they're committing crimes. If you look at drug use, white kids are making these mistakes too. We just have disproportionately locked people up of color, people who live in poverty. They don't get as good an attorney. So does this mean I'm giving up on being conservative, on balanced budgets and less regulations and smaller constitutional growth? No, it just means I'm compassionate for making government fair. But it's coming to people where they are, where they intersect with government. If we do that and realize that just going to people with a balanced budget amendment, low taxes, there's not enough people who care. So you have to reach out to people where they are. If they're poor and unemployed, or if they've been adversely affected by criminal justice, come to them where they are, expand our message, expand our party, and then all of a sudden you're going to find that this huge crowd becomes a bigger and bigger crowd, and all of a sudden we become the dominant party again. And finally, I would say when we bring this message, it needs to be a message with optimism. Why did Reagan win? Policy was good, and we liked what he had to say, but we liked the way he said it. When I think of how we have to present our message, I think there was a painter by the name of Robert Henry, and he said to young painters, his advice was, paint like a man coming over the hill singing. When I think of the sound of music, coming through the Alps, the hills are alive. My wife told me never to sing that. So but when I think of it, I think of that optimism, a man coming over the hill singing. If we can proclaim our message for the Bill of Rights, we can proclaim it with passion. not just the Second Amendment, but the Fourth Amendment, but proclaim our message with passion. Like a man coming over the hill singing, then we'll be the dominant party again. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming, and now Senator Paul will go in the back. We're going to have a photo line, so if you would like to make a line, a nice early line, he'll be happy to have you take a photo with him. So we'll go back here. So thank you.
With the federal budget, I pretty much said you said that in the speech what you do, right? I think it was
Spot, I'll tell you.
Waiting in line to see Rand. Got quite a crowd here today.
Revolution continues.
Right here? Right here, Senator. Great. Thank you.